Колеги, продовжимо.
We continue our working day on the activities of investigations of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Director of National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine, Artem Sytnyk. Good afternoon, esteemed representatives of mass media. I'd like to briefly inform you on the results of investigation of some criminal cases made by the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine. Every investigation which causes some, which leads to some awareness, to some media campaigns, is important, and I would like to briefly tell you about that, and then if you have questions I will answer them. First of all, that's the case versus on stealing the money from the mining plant. Yesterday the detectives of the Bureau, together with the prosecutors of the specialized National Prosecution Office, informed about suspicion to the director of this mining plant. That's the fifth suspect on this case. On the 20th of April, Martinenko and Perloma were detained. The court liberated them, bailed them out, but so talking about the case which is in this final stage, we have 5 suspects in this case, and it's about stealing $17 million during procurement of urine concentrate at higher prices via Austrian intermediary company. If you can show the scheme on the screen, we wrote about that several times. We showed it. That's where the circumstances of the crime committed are described, taking into account the secrecy of the investigation. If you analyze the scheme, then you will see that there are no speculations. There was quite a lengthy investigation, and unfortunately this investigation shows again how big problem we have in state companies and what money are stolen from have been stolen from state companies. This scheme, such a scheme, is quite widespread. Very often they are very similar because they were quite efficient. Those people who were executing these schemes had the immunity, and there was no motivation to change the schemes. Talking about specific figures, 50 cases out of 300 in Anti-Corruption Bureau are on the state companies where such schemes are applied. The sum of losses is about 80 million hryvnias, and that's more than the tranches of the IMF that we receive. As to the prevention measure, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau supports the position of Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office in the issue of appealing against the ruling of the court as to prevention measure. And I would like to say that sometime later the emotions will come down, but the evidence that was collected will be still there. I would like to remind to people who are trying to speculate on some violations of Anti-Corruption Bureau, I would like to remind you that the question on this case was asked to Anti-Corruption Bureau starting from February 2017, and we've been saying that we are working on this case. If we wanted to start working in the sphere of PR, all these arrests and detentions will be happening much earlier. But we've mentioned several times that this case is connected to many international instructions to other states, and this communication lasted for almost a year. Parallel to what was happening in Ukraine, we were waiting for the answers from 8 countries of the world. Not always we receive them quickly. Unfortunately, there are countries which do it quickly. There are countries which do it slower. But after we received all the evidence and all the answers, and together with the prosecutors, the detectives made sure that the evidence was sufficient to announce the suspicion. And I would like to say that's not the first time that I hear it. The case is a test for the Bureau. It's a test for our political elite that showed themselves and not from their best side. And when the MPs start personally offending the judge, the prosecutor, I believe that our elite fails this test. And I can say that there are 5 suspects. Their guilt has been established, and the case will be submitted to the court in the nearest future. We spent a lot of time to receive all the rulings which are now discussed by quasi-experts and by different categories of people, those who lobby the interests of some of the suspects. And that is why I would like to say, to negate all these speculations, the Anti-Corruption Bureau, when we see the attempts to manipulate the mentality, when people start saying, talking about the mass violations of human rights, and some people are just distorting the norms of the law. Like there was an accusation that we detained without the ruling of the court, but read the law. That's in Article 208 of the Criminal Code. So to negate that, I would like to say what's happening in this case, what are we planning to do, and there's no specific statement with any violations. I haven't seen any violations, and I can answer each of your questions. As to political persecution, we have 2 ways of defense from the suspicion or accusation. A person either gets sick or they're talking about political pressure. But I would like to remind you that our investigation on this case goes in parallel with investigations in 3 countries of the world. Talking about political persecution, we cannot imagine how the investigators in other countries are also involved into political persecution. So now, instead of working within the code of procedures, the defense goes to Facebook, to mass media, and that's why we need to make such statements so that the community, the public understands what's happening and how it should end up. Also, I'd like to say that I read the versions why this case is investigated, and I was accused to be the agent of the Department of State and agent of Kremlin. I was astonished to read such things, but what I would like to say, that's not the only investigation of Anti-Corruption Bureau. We now transferred the suspicion to the head of the Central Election Commission, and we are ready to transfer all our evidence that we collected. Also, I read the version that the investigation of the case on Martynenko and others is an attempt to draw your attention away from the failure of the case against the head of the fiscal service. Most of the investigators' actions took place before the detention, part of them after the detention. Now, most of the measures which were planned after the detention have been made, and this case will be transferred to the court. And if you were trying to speculate on that, I can say there's a case, there's a prevention measure, there are activities which allow us to control the behavior of the suspect, and there's an evidence which allows us to transfer this case to the court. Also, I'd like to say that
recently there was again the topic about Judge Charles. In line with our information, he now stays in Moldova in rent apartment. The detective from Anti-Corruption Bureau visited Moldova to meet with Charles, but he rejected to meet with our detective and even did not answer to the question why he applied for political shelter in Moldova. As for me, it is the very simple case about bribe, which is well documented, and that's it. Now I'm open to your questions. Thank you, Artem. Please ask your questions and mention whom you represent. Ukrainsky Novin, Artem Sergeyevich. I have a question about Martynenko case. Whether there were any delays in signing the suspicion and handling the suspicion, and why the activists were not present in court hearings, and the court managed to make a decision in the absence of activists. I do not have any procedural power. I cannot make pressure upon a judge. There were many speculations about the personality of a judge that we were able to influence the ruling of a judge, etc. But I should say that judges usually take our evidence and proofs into consideration and make the ruling which coincides with our position. As for me, I am unable to influence the judge first, and I cannot influence the civic activists, of course. And the second question was about the ruling in absence of public. The prosecutors lawfully requested that all their prescriptions had to be implemented because they understood the high profile of that case. And this is just the beginning. So, and the question, who will be the next? I traditionally do not answer this question. I mean the investigation as to the NABU, the documents which were found, whether there is any expertise of that documents carried out, etc. Of course, there will be a set of expertise carried out. And if our detectives will find something, they will submit it to the prosecutor, anti-corruption prosecutor's office. Українська правда, Artem Kravets. What is the name of the fifth suspect in this case that you described? And whether there will be any case about Oleg Leshko and his ownership of a big house? We had received the case about unlawful ownership and unlawful wealth. As for the fifth suspect, I intentionally do not mention his name. Новое время, 1+1. What is with the case on Energat? Why it was not submitted to the prosecutor's office earlier? What is the problem? I do not know what to answer to you. The director of NABU or special anti-corruption prosecutor do not wait drawing lots what case should be chosen. Different group of detectives work on the collecting evidence for each case, and when they collect sufficient amount of evidence, they prepare the case to the prosecutor. So as soon as we have sufficient amount of evidence, we go to the prosecutor, and I cannot answer your question why this or that case goes to the prosecutor's office first. 1+1 TV channel. Would you mention about the case of Hendovsky? What is this stage? I have heard that the suspicion is already formulated. Whether you plan to announce the suspicion very soon, and whether Mr. Hendovsky will manage to escape. We cannot announce the suspicion without the prosecutor's decision, and we just had collected evidence, submitted that set of evidence to the prosecutor's office, and now we are waiting for their action. 112, the question about Onishchenko tapes, whether they were doctored after gas case. Have you heard those recordings? As far as I understand, they were recorded after the gas case, and 90% of the content is how to escape responsibility on the case. I think the objective of that tapes is to politicize the case, but not to make any and just to make political statements to be supported by those tapes. I do not think that the tapes confirm his loud statements. ONN news agency, whether NABU has any cases related to the road construction and abuse of financial powers in course of road building, because many road building companies participate in very precious tenders. We have several such cases. Recently, we met with Mr. Novak, head of Ukrdavtodor, and we coordinated exchange of information in order to create more such cases. Nemovchi civic organization. Before you, we had the Minister of Justice, and we asked a question about that protection of Mr. Martynenko by 3 ministers, but he commented that experts should not communicate with the experts. You have mixed together the ministers, experts, and investigators. It's not so easy to distinguish between them. We should prevent conflict of interest when the minister is like a trustee for the suspect. The anti-corruption law speaks clearly about the conflict of interest, and we should study carefully this law to understand whether there is a conflict of interest when an active minister becomes a trustee of a suspect in loud political case. I wrote to Mr. Petrenko a letter informing him that there was an attempt of pressure upon experts in course of our anti-financial service case. Now coming back to Chow's topic, whether you hope to get Mr. Chow's back to Ukraine. Now we have the appeal on the decision to release him for home arrest, and we will initiate finally the extradition procedure. For me, it's difficult to say that this is political case. Thank you, Mr. Sytnyk. Thank you for your questions. The next event will be in 3 minutes here.